Hi, it's Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're doing an unboxing and product tour of the ASRock H610M ITX/AC. This is an extremely cost-effective ITX motherboard, if those two things even mean anything together. ITX and cost-effective, yeah, they generally don't mix. But in this particular instance, this was a Amazon warehouse deal, which I picked up from amazon.co.uk. And this has cost us somewhere in the region of about £110, which for an ITX board actually isn't too bad, especially on the Intel platform. Now this supports the Intel LGA1700 socket and is compatible with 14th, 13th and 12th generation Intel LGA1700 processors, so there's an absolute ton of options for this particular little board. Now it does have a 6-phase VRM with 50 amp chokes, so there are going to be some limitations. Clearly, being it is Mini ITX, there are going to be some limitations anyway, but due to the power limitations of this particular motherboard, it's probably not best suited to go with some high core count or high wattage processors. For most people that are building a PC with a Mini ITX motherboard, generally you're going to be looking at things such as efficiency and running cool, so possibly those processors won't be on your list anyway. For us specifically, we'll be doing a very special build with this particular motherboard coming up very soon on the channel, so please do say subscribe for that. And we will be using this board in conjunction with the Intel i5-12400 processor. So we're going to do a nice little Mini ITX build. This is the board I've chosen for it, and I thought I'd do a quick unboxing so you can see what it's all about and find out about some of the features. So 6-phase VRM on here, which is digital rather than analog, so that is actually something quite helpful. It's a very compact board, as you'd expect from a ITX board, so it's basically square. Not a great deal of features on here. Again, that is going to be a limitation of both the size of the board and also the chipset, being this is the Intel 610 or H610 chipset, I should say. So one of the key differences for this kind of budget platform, if you're maybe considering an ITX build, you're not really sure which direction to go, if you're going down the Intel route, with the H610 chipset, you actually still get your PCIe Gen4 on your graphics card slot. So if you are doing a build, you are going to be using a discrete graphics card rather than integrated graphics, then this might be something which sways you because you're going to get more performance rather than you would out of an A520 motherboard on the AMD side of the fence. The downside of that is because there are limitations of the chipset, we do get a slight reduction in speed on the M.2 slot, so we're looking at PCI Express Gen 3 x 4 as a maximum, or potentially a SATA SSD based drive should you wish to. Other than that, pretty much straightforward stuff, so let's go through and take a look at the ports and the connectivity as we go through. First of all, take a very quick look at the box itself, look at the packaging, so pretty standard stuff, bottom of the range stuff. On the box, they haven't updated it yet to say 14th gen, but it does support 14th gen if you look on the website. Links for that will be in the video description, by the way. So 13th, 12th and 14th gen support. It's got HDMI ports on here. This actually does support, believe it or not, addressable RGB. So there is actually an addressable RGB port on here, which again, for a low-end chipset, that is a very rare thing to see, so always positive to see one of those on a motherboard. Processor-wise, this is going to support everything from the G6900, right at the very bottom of the end, up to, strangely enough, the Intel 14900KS. Now, clearly you're not going to get the best out of it, but it does support it. On the back of the box, we've got the specifications and also a layout of the rear I/O, which we'll go through later. It also discusses the dual band AC Wi-Fi, which is built in along with Bluetooth. We've got Intel Gigabit LAN. We've also got Ultra M.2 for SSD. We've got USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, that's 5 gigabit per second. And also it mentions again that phase of VRMs with the 50 amp DRMOS chokes. As for the unboxing experience, actually surprisingly you do get some pretty decent stuff in here. So you get a user manual, or it's very handy to have, especially on these little boards where there's very tiny little pins on there and you're not entirely sure what they are, but we will point those out, so don't worry too much. You also get a installation DVD. Again, something you rarely see these days. These have been pretty much phased out. This would be quite handy if you're doing some sort of media center little PC. You're going to have a DVD or a Blu-ray drive, so potentially that is going to be useful to you. You also get a single solitary, very lonely M.2 screw for the single solitary lonely M.2 slot on the motherboard. You also get a pair of Wi-Fi antenna for the built-in AC Wi-Fi. There's 2 SATA cables, one with a right angle connection, one with a straight. And also there is a I/O shield, which sadly isn't captive. Again, this is a lower end board, but it's nice to see that it is actually one of those ones which is cushioned rather than just being a bare piece of metal, so at least there's that. So we'll start with a tour of the motherboard, and we'll start in this top left-hand corner. So in the top section, 4-pin PWM chassis fan header. Next up, 8-pin power connection for EPS. Underneath that, got a very small heatsink over that 6-phase VRM. Always nice to see at least something on there. If you're going to be using certain processors on here, especially in smaller environments, smaller enclosures, I would definitely recommend trying to aim for a top-down cooler. So it's going to blow some air over those components to keep things cool if at all possible. But ultimately, your case is going to kind of dictate what you can use on there. Dead in the middle there, we've got the LJ1700 socket, as you'd expect, with all those tiny pins which can potentially get bent, which is always something that worries me. At the top here, 3 cool connectors. So we've got the CPU fan header. Next to that, there is another chassis fan header stroke water pump connection if you're using some kind of water cooler in your tiny ITX build, all of which 4-pin PWM controllable in the BIOS or in the ASRock software, and they will support both 4-pin and 3-pin devices depending on what you want to use. Next to that, addressable RGB, 3-pin 5V, always nice to see one of those. Again, it really does freak me out that this is really a budget board in terms of ITX, but it's actually got some very cool features on there, so pleased with that. Next to that, we've got 2 RAM slots. So this is going to support up to 64 gigs of RAM if you can get hold of it. Realistically, most people, I think 32 gigs of RAM will be fine. 2 16 gig sticks on there. Officially supporting up to DDR4 3200 speeds. Again, down to the limitations of the chipset and also the processors, then your mileage may vary if you put in anything higher than that. But I think for most people, DDR4 3200 is pretty much the sweet spot in terms of pricing and availability these days. Moving across, 24-pin main power connector. Underneath that, USB 3.0 front panel connection there. 4 SATA ports, so if you want to connect up a bunch of drives, maybe you're using some sort of NAS configuration, you can connect up all of those. If you do use a M.2 SATA based drive in the PCIe M.2 slot, then you will lose one of those ports. So one kind of switches between the two, but if you don't use that, you get all 4. If you do use that with a SATA based drive, not an NVMe, but a SATA one, then you will lose a port there. Underneath that, we've got our front panel connections, so hard drive LED, power LED, reset switch, power switch. Next to that, there is the USB 2.0 header. Those are really close together and they look almost identical. So the one closer to you on the outside edge, that is the one for the front panel connectors. The one which is slightly in more, that is for USB 2.0. Also in there, you've got the clear CMOS, which is actually quite handy because you'll probably notice that the battery for the motherboard CMOS settings is actually connected over here, which potentially might be really tricky to get to. So having the clear CMOS over on this far side, possibly a little bit easier to get to. Although if you have a graphics card installed in this bottom slot, which is PCI Express Gen4 x 16, so full width slot there, yeah, you might find it a little bit difficult to get to that underneath there, but you do have a large latch there for removing said GPU should you need to. There's also a UART connection at the bottom there, which looks like a 3-pin 5V addressable RGB header, but it isn't. I've mentioned this before. It's basically for programming the board and gaining access to the BIOS, that sort of stuff. More of a factory thing than a user thing. So above the graphics card slot, we've got the Ultra M.2, so PCI Express Gen 3 x 4 supported, and also SATA M.2 drives. If you can even find one these days, they're very hard to come by, but again, depending where you are in the world and what is available, you may be able to pick one up, although they generally tend to be more expensive and actually slower than their PCI Express NVMe counterparts, so I would probably suggest going for one of those anyway. Moving across, so we've got our chipset, the H610 chipset there with a heatsink over the top of it. Moving just to the side of that, there is the BIOS chip itself, and this one's actually got BIOS version 7.01 actually installed out of the factory, so that's pretty good. That's going to support your 13th gen processors. Not ready for 14th out of the box, and unfortunately there is no BIOS flashback, so if you are planning on getting one of these boards and getting a 14th gen processor, potentially you're going to have to put an older CPU in there in order to gain access to the BIOS, to flash it, to then get it ready for your newer processor. So no BIOS flashback on this at all, so do bear that in mind. You may find some retailers will sell this particular board and there'll be a sticker on the box saying 14th gen ready, in which case they will have BIOS version, I think it's 9.01 installed, which does support all of the 14th gen family at the time of recording anyway. Also down in this corner, we've got our audio chipset, so it's a Realtek RTL 897, so it supports actually 7.1 analog surround. It's only got 3 ports on the back, so if you do want to take advantage of that in analog, you will have to use your front panel audio connectors and kind of split it through there. So realistically, I think for most people, just a normal set of speakers is going to be fine. Otherwise, plug in a headset on the USB ports. And speaking of which, we will take a look at the back panel right now. So not a great deal going on here, which is actually very good for filming purposes because it doesn't take very long to do. But let's quickly drill through them. So we've got an HDMI socket there. You also got a display port. Now both of these will only work if you get a processor with integrated graphics. And also it's only going to be the kind of basic Intel stuff. So I think the 770 is probably about the highest you'll get on here at present. If that changes, then that'll be great. But yeah, not the best onboard graphics, to be fair. AMD has a stronger suit there, I feel, at the moment. Moving across, so this is the main bulk of it here. So we've got USB 3.2 Gen 1 ports, 2 of those, 5 gigabit per second. Above that, you have a keyboard and mouse combo port, if you want to use that, PS2 style. Then we've got our Intel onboard LAN. So this is gigabit LAN from Intel. Underneath that, 2 USB 2.0 ports. Next that, there is the AC Wi-Fi. So again, up to 433 megabits per second, so not the fastest, but with these, you can actually take them out. There's a couple of screws on the bottom. You can actually remove those Wi-Fi cards and put in something better should you wish to. The choice is yours, but the Wi-Fi, as it comes out of the box, is going to be fine for most people. Also includes Bluetooth functionality as well. Next up, we've got our 3 audio jacks, color-coded. So green is going to be for your headphones or speakers, blue is the line, and the pink is going to be for your microphone. Other than that, that is pretty much it. On the back, nothing at all. Sadly, no room for an extra M.2 slot. That would have been a nice thing to see. But otherwise, I think that is going to be pretty much it. In terms of the actual physical characteristics of the board and the looks, I think it actually looks quite nice. You've got some really nice shades there. There isn't any kind of weird colors going on, so it should fit into most color schemes if you're going to be putting this into a PC where there is going to be side panel access or you're going to see what's going on. Although realistically, with most of the components in there and the cooler, a lot of it's going to be covered up anyway. So there you go. That is the overview and first look at the ASRock H610M ITX/AC. Hopefully you've enjoyed the video. If you have, leave a like on the video, that is always useful. And also if there's anything you feel that I've missed or that you would like explained in more detail, you're more than welcome to reach out in that comment section below, or alternatively you can head over to our Discord, links for that will be in the video description as well, and you can ask any questions that you may have. But otherwise, I think that's going to be pretty much it. This build is going to be pretty special, so make sure you stay subscribed for that. Yeah, it's a very, very cool ITX case we've got coming up very shortly on the channel. So yeah, I'm very excited to see that when it comes. So I think that's going to wrap things up. I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.